Oh, just say yes or whatever you want to, and Ajoy calls out your names.
Anush, Arshad is here, and Dhruv is here. Jimpa is here. Madan Mohan Rao, Manu Morgil, Shakti, Sangapriya Rahul. Yes, Sangapriya. Siddharth, Sonia, Sumantro, Sumantro. No, Sumantro is one more. Kritika, Gaurav, Claudwell, Soumitra is here. Okay, thanks.
Another 5 minutes and we'll start. Morning, everyone. I'm Nirmita from the Center for Internet and Society, and I think we have 2 people missing and a couple of CIS people also missing, but we should start on time as much as possible so that our sessions don't suffer. I'll start by welcoming all of you to the Internet and Society Institute, which is our first institute, thanks to Ford Foundation. After 5 years of CIS being in existence, this is the first time we've been encouraged and prodded to have such an institute, and hopefully it will be a success and we'll have more such institutes. As you all know, this is the introductory session, and what we'd ideally like is to just quickly introduce all ourselves and the project of which this institute is a part. A background on the project. So we are doing a project which is funded by the Ford Foundation to create an online repository of information on internet and society related topics. And why do we need to do that? Because we have very less civil society engagement on these issues. So CIS being a research organization, we do go to the central government ministries, Department of Telecom, Department of IT, and we try to, give our feedback on various policies, but we appear to be the only civil society organization from anywhere in India to be there. Maybe there's one more, but it's mostly us. So clearly there is a need for more engagement to put forward the public perspective. And that is originally why this project has started. And as part of this, apart from building the content on the website, we have a website, institute.in, as all of you already know, where you've registered. We are also having capacity building workshops like this, and this is the first one. It's a 7-day institute, as you all know, and we are covering basics, history, infrastructure, policies, bodies and mechanisms which are governing the internet, and how do NGOs or how do civil society, how do you participate both in to use internet to do activism as well as to do activism to enhance internet. So all these things are getting covered in the 7 days. So we will start, we'll try to start our next session a little before time because there's a lot to cover on global history of the internet. So with this I will just start the round of introduction. I'm Nirmita. I work with the Center for Internet and Society as a policy director. I work on issues of accessibility, a little telecom, and little IP, a little whatever else, but mostly my area, focus area is accessibility. And I manage this particular project. What I would also like is that if all of you can introduce yourselves very briefly and tell us why you're here in 1 or 2 sentences, and tell us one interesting fact about yourself. Starting from my right. It's on.
My name is Madan Mohan Rao. I work with a organization called Yugantar, and we are concerned about increasing access to the internet and using IT in rural areas. And to that extent, we thought to look at all the legal issues and other technology issues related to that. This would be an interesting time today. Thank you.
And one interesting fact about yourself.
Okay. No, we are one of the 8 private consortiums doing Government of India PPP project, the first major initiative of the Government of India, PURA, PURA, Provision of Urban Amenities. So I think that's what I could consider the most interesting.
I don't agree, but let's get better as we go along and people have more time to think about it.
Hi, my name is Sahana. I'm a freelance journalist, and my areas of interest, I write on health mostly, but my area of interest lies in accessibility issues, internet accessibility, and also I've done some writing on disabilities and how accessibility and internet and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Everyone's skipping the interesting fact, so we'll have to do another round while people think of it.
Yeah, maybe once we get to know each other a little more, things would come out. Yeah, my name is Shiva Guru. I recently retired from service in the IT services industry. And one of my interest areas has been to empower rural primary schools, where I've been doing some small things with CII. And the reason I'm here is to understand how we can create a platform that will empower both teachers as well as students, mainly to capture some of the indigenous knowledge in terms of rites of passage and things that are not really getting captured or passed on. And yeah, I hope to learn a lot from here.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Soumitra Roy. I'm working with Vikas Samvad, and we are working on digital divide, uh, uh, the issue with Ford Foundation, and uh, it's a rural and urban digital divide. So, and the interesting fact is, I was a journalist till 2011, and then I joined the civil society, and technology is my passion. That's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gaurav Agrawal. I am a computer engineering graduate who's now studying law at Delhi University. And I think turning into a law student from a computer engineer is itself an interesting fact about me.
Oh no, come on. Nobody's fallen off horses, hit dogs, I mean, done anything interesting. It's like, and been in jail, I mean, something interesting. Anything. I mean, embarrassing is interesting. That's called Schadenfreude in German. I mean, when something bad happens to somebody, you're happy. So there's a whole philosophy around it.
Hi, my name is Sumandro. I presently work with Sarai CSDS in Delhi, and I work with HasGeek in Bangalore. By training, I'm an economist. It's not really interesting, but I have never really studied anything that I do right now. Um, I work on e-governance policy, a bit of IT policy, a bit of telecom policy, a lot of data policy, especially the national data sharing and accessibility policy, on which I work. I also do a bit of data visualization. I've worked with CIS and some other organizations. Very not very long time, but still. Thanks a lot.
Hi everyone, my name is Sonia. I'm from Bombay. I work in a research collective called Pukar, which is in Bandra. We are currently, I'm in the Mythologies of Mumbai team, managing the team. And currently we are working in 2 areas in Bombay. One is Girangaon, the old mill area that used to exist, and Dharavi. We are trying to understand media access over there. How we can involve youth in the community to build platforms for communication, to tell oral stories, histories, etc.
Hi, my name is Preeti. I'm studying in the University of Hyderabad. I'm doing English, and the reason I came for this seminar is that I really like I was interested in the topics they cover or the issues they talked about. I probably want to know more. And the work I've done so far is only academics, like academic research, that's it.
Hi, I am Jhumpa from Calcutta. I am from Change Initiatives and NGO. We are working for ICT for education, ICT with women for last 10 years. I want to know something from here and want to contribute my knowledge in our work. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kritika from Mumbai and I'm studying BA from the Mumbai University. I think I'm the only undergrad student over here, but hello, never mind.
Is that the interesting fact or there's something?
That is the interesting fact. The
Okay.
other interesting fact, well, we'll go to that later. Anyway, I'm interning with a co-working space called The Place. It's in Mulund and it's been 6 months that it exists and it's doing good. Thank you.
My name is Dhruv Arora. I'm from Delhi. I'm working with an organization called Got Stared At. We're working with the internet and, oh, you know, we're working with the internet. We're trying to talk about sexual harassment in different and unique ways. I think the interesting fact that I can think of is that I belong to this typical Punjabi business family. And from initially, my parents were very sure that this guy is going to grow up to manage their business. And then I started doing engineering. When they were very sure that I was going to get a very good job and start working, then I joined an NGO, and then my parents were like, you know what, I don't care. So just tell me what you're doing in the end of 10 years and we'll figure it out. And now when I tell them that I'm working with social media and websites and all of that, they're like, you know what, this is a fancy word for saying that you sit on Facebook all day and you don't do anything with your life. So I think the interesting fact about me is that even though I think that I'm doing too much work, my parents still think that I'm in school. Because they don't think I'm doing any work because I sit on Facebook all day apparently.
Thanks for that.
I'm Shakti Vel. I teach law at Indraprastha University, Delhi. My doctoral research is on peer-to-peer technology. That's the reason why I'm here. First 4 days of this workshop will be useful to me, very useful to me to complete my thesis. That's all. Thank you.
Nothing interesting about your students as well. How you task them with a lot of assignments.
Good morning to all. I am Caldwell Newton. I am an assistant professor in Bishop Weber College, Trichy, Tamil Nadu. I am also a research advisor for PhD scholars. My area of interest is computer networks, and I hope this institute will be useful to do an effective research. I love teaching. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Siddharth Pandit. I'm from Bombay. I work with the Urban Design Research Institute as a director of projects there. We are currently looking at the Mumbai's development plan for the next 20 years, and citywide broadband infrastructure is something that we have identified as a key input to the development plan for the next 20 years. We want the city stakeholders to own it, ask for it, and the BMC to implement it. So hopefully this conference will help us understand what are the key mediums of distribution, what is the key infrastructure points. Interesting point about me, last week I got an entire file dedicated to me at the BMC for RTI applications. I think I'm probably number 8 now, and the top 2 are from our institute itself. So I'm trying to inch to get there. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Manu from Media Foundation, Delhi. We work on media monitoring as well as research projects related to media. Currently we are working on digitization of Doordarshan and perception of rural communities in 5 states to Doordarshan's programming. And what else? 2 years ago I founded a web magazine called GUI Monitor. It's on policy issues and grassroots news. Please don't check it right now because it's down for maintenance. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Arshad Amanullah. I'm from New Delhi, Center for Culture, Media and Governance. I was coordinator of the project Mapping Media Policy and Law, funded by Ford Foundation. And hopefully I'll work with another project which was given by Ford Foundation, tracking access under digitalization. Presently I'm looking after a blog which is called indianmedialog.com. We update it regularly, so please have a look. Before that, yeah, I'm from Jamia in the sense I have training in mass communication. I did a bit of documentary films. Interesting fact, yeah. Yesterday, I got a call from a poet who works with AIR. So he was very fascinated that earlier I was running a blog called Skull Caps on mosques, madrasas and mindsets. So I translated a couple of Urdu verses, actually two, one ghazal and one poem. And I didn't know the poet and I posted it on the blog. So the poet recently found out. So he called me. I mean, first he wrote the mail and then I provided him my mobile phone number. So then he called me back and he was very thankful. And now he is offering me a talk on the AIR.
Okay. Hi, I'm Rashmi. I'm from NIAS, National Institute of Advanced Studies. I'm a PhD student there, right now working on online sharing practices. So I'm in my first year, clueless, lost. So as every PhD student is, probably that's the interesting fact, if you can call it. Okay.
Hi, my name is Anosh Malekar. I'm a journalist from Pune. My interest is long form journalism. I've just finished a 15,000 word piece for the Caravan, and I'm moving on to my next assignment in Pune. I'm looking at the digital divide within a city, unlike rural and urban. And next 2 years we'll be really going around and checking out whether the whole internet revolution has helped the poor in a city like Pune. Interesting fact, I think I have a 17-year-old son who has realized he's grown taller than me, and this will make you happy. He's pretty serious about letting me know who's the man of the house now.
Hello everyone, my name is Shalini. I'm from Bangalore, working for an NGO called Janus 2. We are working with the shepherds actually. Like we want to uh, we are actually fighting for their rights, like how the government occupied their fallow lands and all. So like we are looking for something which we can do for them. So
Hi, I'm VK Chopra. I belong to BSNL. I'm working as a senior general manager in Delhi. And in this department, I'm working for the last 30 years. And main idea of coming over here was just to know who are the stakeholders in internet. And today I'm very much sure that a lot of interesting people are the stakeholders. And second thing is I belong to the era when, there was a hardly, proliferation of communication within even in the urban areas. I remember in 1982 when Chogam was there, and one journalist rightly pointed out that STD stands for subscriber trying and dying. So that was the time, what thing was there, and with the advent of technology, and even though working in the department, we are also not sure that how much we know about it. I think the youngsters, they know better than us, but still it will be interesting to know about all of you as the stakeholders. And evening, whatever the talk is there, how as a PSU we are contributing towards reaching to the rural areas. Because recently I was in Kashmir, posted as a senior general manager in Srinagar. So there I have come to know that people from the rural areas, they are more hungry for the information than the people in the urban areas. So this is the kind of thing they are really feeling a divide, and they want that they should have more information, and appetite is more than the urban areas. That is what I felt over there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be handing over to Ravina, Dr. Ravina Agarwal from Fort. But before that, I'd just like to say there are other members of my team, and Ajoy, Parvati, and Pranesh and many others, and you'll be meeting them along the week when they will be presenting. And well, one interesting fact about myself, since I've been asking all of you with that, is no one in CIS knows, but if I could, I've always wanted to be a veterinarian because I liked animals. And I'm Center for Internet and Society doing policy, but I'm happy. So that's an interesting fact. Ravina, would you like to take over? And
I'll just speak. Is it? Sure. Yeah, should I come there?
No, no, please sit here. Oh, you have a mic. I'm sorry.
Really now thinking about the interesting thing about me has kind of lightened the mood considerably. So I'll start with that. I think, are there enough people from CIS around? Okay, so you tell them that the interesting thing about me is I love to play poker online too. So they'll understand why that's so significant. Okay, so I'm Ravina Agarwal. I'm from the Ford Foundation, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Ford Foundation and why this program is part of is part of the broader mission that we support. So, I want to start off first by thanking CIS and thanking Nirmita. You have been assiduous in putting everything together. It has been it's been a very hard work actually, getting everybody coordinated and together, and it's a first. So it's a first for CIS. I'm sure there might be other institutes in the world. There might be other things happening all over, but a friend of mine actually, who's on the board of a pretty well-known online platform, asked me, can you recommend any international courses that I could take for a week or two on the internet? And I said, you know, we don't have any here, so why don't we do one here and start it off from here? For people who are not in academia necessarily and don't always have access to learning in those areas, or people from different disciplines who might not have a whole year to study but might like to be aware of the activities on the internet or the broader issues that concern them, since we're all part of a community of users and the internet is also our business. So that's how the idea came about, and it's been actually quite recent, and in a very short time, Nirmita and her team have pulled this together. So I'm extremely happy that it's happening. We're going to have lots of kind of gap areas, so please give your feedback, and you are kind of our guinea pigs in that sense, but I hope that you really have a meaningful experience, and wherever you feel it could be improved, please share that feedback, because we are hoping that this is not a one-time thing or once a year thing, but that it's open to many other groups as well. So in terms of the work of the Ford Foundation, I should speak about that a little bit. And for some of you who know us already because you are our partners, I'll just have to repeat that. But for those of you who are new to us, the Ford Foundation has been in India since 1952. It's headquartered in the US. Yes, it had things to do with the Ford Motors family, but no, it's not got anything to do with them now. It's completely an independent, in that sense, foundation with its own board of trustees. One of the trustees is from India, Narayan Murthy, and in the past, Ratan Tata was also on the board. So we have an international board of people from various sectors, and a lot of them from the social justice sector. We see ourselves as a social justice philanthropy, and in 1952, the Prime Minister Nehru invited the Ford Foundation to India, and at that time, a lot of the foundation was pretty instrumental in bringing a lot of expertise from other places and from the West to India, but it was committed right from the beginning in trying to set up and strengthen Indian expertise at Indian institutions. So if you look at some of the premier institutions, from the IITs to even the Planning Commission to Doordarshan, you'll find, to the Indian Council for Social Science Research, you'll find, to the Delhi Vision, the plans for cities, etc. You'll find that Ford has a legacy in them, right? So I come to this job that I'm doing with that legacy, for positive and negative, and we can as everything, there are mistakes that one makes, and one takes a risk. not everything is a success. In the 70s, in the late 70s, the foundation stopped being an implementing organization and became purely a funding organization. So I wouldn't say purely as in I'm not sitting there, my job is not to sit there and process applications, but nonetheless, we don't implement on the ground ourselves. We support organizations, and I think there's in the 50s, as you can imagine, there weren't NGOs like that. So this is, we are seeing a different generation of civil society organizing. So today, for those of you who are from, NGOs, you'll find that the questions we ask you are very different from even the questions that were asked 10 years ago. They expect a certain maturity in, civil society organizations. They expect that it will not be just a group of people doing certain things, but that now you have a vision, you have the benefit of experience of other organizations as well. Our work is built on the principles of the Indian democracy and and we work very closely with. Currently, our work is aimed at enhancing some of the principles that the government has laid out in its policy structure, and working with groups to enable that to happen. So to do creative solutions. Sometimes it's very inflexible in terms of what you can do. Even though the policy structure might be really, really progressive, the implementation sometimes is extremely difficult, or coming to policy and planning might be difficult. So a lot of our grantees are working on strengthening the core values of the Indian democratic system. And most of our grantees actually use a rights-based perspective, but are not in an oppositional stage, with the government. They actually are looking to partner and work with government in in strengthening government, let's say. And we work in 6 areas. Poverty is a huge area that we work with. So inclusive growth and poverty alleviation are are basically core to the work that we do. So, and the 6 areas that we work in include agricultural policy, livelihoods, sexuality and reproductive health and rights, economic and social rights, and governance, inclusive governance, and the work that I support under the Freedom of Expression program, which is called Advancing Media Rights and Access. The program that I support, the way we work is that we understand that when I say advancing media rights and access is a huge thing, and it can mean many, many things, and how you get access, entails very, very different modes of intervention. But the strategy that we have chosen after looking at the field and seeing what were some of the problems in contemporary India are to specifically address the digital divide, with the idea that we have commitments to universal access, and and this is a big commitment that we have in various policies, but actually the rate of penetration has been extremely low. It's 10%. So as we move more and more of our ways of being social or economic or political beings online, how can we ensure that the poor are also participating in this? So this is how do we come up with creative plans with a variety of stakeholders in that. And so our work is focused primarily on network connectivity issues and digitalization of broadcasting issues. This is what we work on. And part of what we support is research to actually look at what's happening on the ground. So give that evidence, so very strong research agendas. Second is technological deployments, particularly with the licenses or in unlicensed bands with Wi-Fi technologies. So we are working with the IITs on coming up with interesting pilots that would, help the government or come up with models. So these are some of the technological pilots that we do, and we do civil society infrastructure and capacity building. So these are the three areas that we primarily support in the initiative that I'm working on. And some of our partners, so this institute was designed to keep some of our partners in mind, and I know that Pukar is, so the urban work that we're doing is 2 big aspects of the urban work are looking at universal access and demystifying it. and looking at what could it mean in a place where people belong, right? So if you belong in a city, how do you have universal access in a city, and how can a city commit to universal access? So that's the work we are doing with UDRI that we're funding, and we're also funding that work with CCDS in Pune. So Bombay and Pune are the two pilot cities. We just started with those. We are working on with our research partners. I see Vikas Samvad from Madhya Pradesh is here. Pukar is also doing research work in Bombay, in Mumbai, and CCDS, all of you are doing all kinds, and Media Foundation is looking at the digitalization of broadcast, of television broadcasting, of Doordarshan, and what does it mean on the ground, you know, and so these inputs are then very consciously fed back into the government. So it's always to provide that input, it's always to partner with government in these areas. And so this is the kind of work that we support, and we're really looking forward to having you know, interesting conversations around that. What you hear sometimes are people's points of views also. As an academic in my previous, you know, birth before Ford Foundation, we have a, you know, once you leave the Ford Foundation, it's that we have a special forum called LAF, which is Life After Ford Foundation. So in my life before Ford Foundation, I've been an academic primarily, and you know, it's important as you're listening to perspectives and views to keep your mind open. It's to get an idea. It's not to actually follow a critical line of thinking, but actually to be exposed to various ideas so that you understand the universe around which we access becomes very important, and how access is being discussed in India and globally at this particular time.
Thanks, Ravina. So I'd just like to mention here that this entire course, Ravina has not only encouraged and prodded us and supported us financially, but as you will not find many donors. Actually, I think I've hardly found one so far. She sat on the table and designed and redesigned the agenda with us and ensured that we have the right speakers. And yeah, she's handled us, and she's put all her whatever she has into this, ensuring that this institute goes off well. So I'd really like to thank her for making us, you know, think of doing this, and also supporting us intellectually throughout the organizing of this institute. With that, I think we want to start with the next session right now, because there's a lot to say, and also because a lot of you haven't told us interesting things about yourselves, and we have a lot of time left over. So the next session, there's been a slight change. Our original speaker, Mr. Madan Mohan Rao, couldn't make it because he's stuck in Africa. But we are very fortunate that we have extremely competent colleagues. And Bernadette is interning with CIS for 3 months. She's from Munich. She's going to be talking about global history of the internet, along with my colleague Pranesh Prakash, who's just stepped out for a very brief media interview. He's getting very famous. So, you know, he's talking about privacy and central monitoring system, and there's 6 coverages of his quotes in the newspaper. So he'll be back in a minute. Over to Bernadette, you ready to start? In about 5 minutes until you're set up, maybe.
Yeah, for Pranesh, that'll be good. Okay. Yeah, I will explain a little bit of the history of the internet as global, and Pranesh is gonna have some. Yeah, okay. So I'm Bernadette, as she said. I'm working for CIS right now. I studied cultural and social anthropology, as well as philosophy and computer science in Munich. So I'm from Germany, and yeah, I'm also a member of the Chaos Computer Club. I don't know if anyone of you is aware of that. Okay. And yeah, so I'm yeah, very aware of that stuff on privacy and data retention and everything, what's going on in the internet, and civil rights is actually the topic. So yeah, but now the topic is the history of the internet. So where did it come from? Why is it as we have it today? So first of all, what are we doing in the internet? What is it? We read and write, we look for information, we look for places and maps, we check emails, we speak with friends over instant messaging or even voice over IP. We're watching pictures, we connect to old friends, maybe on a social network. we watch out for regional, national, and international news, and maybe news of people or things and gadgets we're interested in. We maybe watch the news online or even do some entertaining online. We listen to music, maybe listen to podcasts, maybe for educational reasons. Also, we buy some things and services, for example, travel services, and we will pay by online banking. And also, we're looking for how-tos and do-it-yourself information, or looking for a job or a place to live. So that list could be a lot bigger, but I guess every one of you will have at least like 3 things on the list you did. I even hope so, because then you know how the internet works. So the internet is actually a network in a network of networks. So actually this was a part Pranesh wanted to do, so I will just have it. Then it is built on protocols. So what is a protocol? Just raise your hand who knows what a protocol in the internet is. Okay, so a protocol is not in the internet, is something which is, for example, a protocol, an etiquette. So a diplomacy person, or yeah, if you go to another country, you have to follow a protocol. So I could not, like in Germany at this kind of weather, I could wear a really short skirt or something, but this will not fit the protocol in India. So this is kind of a protocol. Then there are policy protocols, so rules to follow. And there are communication protocols, which is the ones we are talking about. So this is just a set of rules, maybe written down, maybe not, but it just helps to communicate 2 parties to each other. So as the protocols in the real life, it helps that 2 parties can communicate to each other, and so is it in the internet. So if my computer is speaking or knowing about the HTTP protocol, and it connects to a server which has a website, which also knows about the HTTP protocol, both computers know what to do and they can communicate to each other. So every service in the internet, and there are a lot more services than just the HTTP, the web you are using most often, I guess. For example, the email. Maybe you had set up an email client, then you had to add in the SMTP, which is also, the P is a protocol. And there are hundreds of protocols, and it's kind of the physical layer of the internet, if you want to see it like this. I mean, it's not physical, but the protocols, that's something you really have to know to get through this. Also the protocol equivalence. So a supercomputer is the same as a smartphone. No one will make any difference if, yeah, I'm a laptop or I'm a server or I'm a supercomputer or a smartphone. Every computer can connect to each other and communicate to each other. And also, it doesn't matter what kind of network we are talking on. Like email, if you have a Gmail address and you want to communicate with someone at the CIS address, it will just work. So you're not, if you would stay in the same network, you could just write emails from Gmail to Gmail, for example. Yeah, so now we start. The beginning. There is actually no starting point, but also there are many starting points. So we choose the Cold War as a starting point. The USA had to respond on the Sputnik shock. So you know the Sputnik, that satellite, the Russians brought up in the space, and everyone was going crazy. Okay, what have they done? So the USA started to make the ARPA, the Advanced Research Project Agency, which was actually a military thing. But they didn't have any particular order. They would just said, okay, here you get money, and you get a lot of people, and even your military, you can publish everything, so you're totally autonomous, and just do something better than the Russians have done, because we are like, yeah, we have to do something. So this is the point which we have chosen as the beginning. So a few years later, out of that ARPA, there came out the first papers. We choose the Kleinrock, that's actually the most important ones. the information flow in large communication nets from Leonard Kleinrock. He was the first one who set up the idea of packet switching networks. What's packet switching? I will explain on the next slide. But this is really important that he already had the idea of packet switching networks at that point. Then we have Licklider, who wrote a series of memos discussing the intergalactic computer network, where he just had ideas on a lot of computers connected to each other. Actually, he explained a lot of stuff, even cloud computing and everything we have nowadays. Also, at that time, time sharing already existed. There were big computers, big mainframe systems, and a lot of users could share. There was multi-user systems, so they can remotely connect to that machine already. Yeah, packet switching. Maybe you know that pictures. There's this lady. You see the lines. So this is how it was before. So you actually got connected. So you see the guy here. So when you did a call, then you were connected to those guys, and they plugged in the wires so that you and the one you calling are connected from each wire. You just have one line. So this is what it was before we had packet switching. So nowadays the network looks like this, and so that's the reason why we have to have packet switching, because there's no single line anymore. So you cannot make sure that the packet will really reach the destination. Maybe it will get just lost somewhere on the way because there are so many ways. Yeah, by the way, you're here. And yeah, that's the reason why we have packet switching. In 1967, there was a conference that brought together a lot of people, the ones from APRA and a lot of people from all over the world. They're actually working on the same idea independently. So right after that, the first computers were connected. And more computers get connected there. And then the request for commons started. I will explain that. But what is important, the inventors, so the guys using it, the guys who had the idea, are both users and developers at the same time. So what is that request for comment? It's papers, documents where technical and organizational issues are discussed. They keep that name since today, although they often get standards. So actually they should shift the name from request for comment to, okay, we're done, we're using it. But it's still a request for comment. And that's pretty important because a lot of standards, I have some examples here. We will talk about all of this. So if you don't hear on-net services before, it's no problem. So there's just a guy having a good idea and thinks, okay, that would be nice if we would do it on that way. So he writes this request for comments, and he just asked the whole community, what do you think about? Do you think it's a good idea? And if no one thinks that it's a good idea, then it will be dropped. Like, yeah, there are really many of them that haven't gone anywhere. But the ones people say, oh, that's a good idea, maybe we could change a little bit, but yeah, I will use it. And then there are a couple of people, yeah, I'm going to use it as well, I'm going to use it as well. And so if everyone starts to use it, it is just a de facto standard, without anyone saying, okay, this is now a law, everyone has to use it, because it's just, it just happens that it gets a standard, because everyone thinks it's a nice idea, and he's just using it. So we have that services. We will go for it in the history. You will learn what this is. And the three above, this is just examples that it is not only about the techniques. It's also about ethics, for example. It's also about like instructions to write RFC. So it's recursive as well on itself. And also the iCalendar as a really early example. You also see the number, it's really a high number, to show you that it's really used nowadays.
So just to add a little bit here, these, if you ever read any of these RFCs, you'll see that they're generally detailed specifications about one or the other well, generally protocol or standard, etc. So there's everything from netiquette. So there are RFCs on netiquette from way back when that word was still in vogue, to things about email. So there are around 10 different RFCs on email. So that's when someone has to create an email client or has to implement an email server, they look at these and say, okay, fine, this is how we'll actually go about doing it, because someone has actually taken the effort to put in a lot of time and work into thinking about these and putting it out in the language of a specification. And as Bernadette mentioned, there are lots of competing standards that exist outside as well. For instance, for some very basic things, ITU has certain standards which haven't gone anywhere, whereas some RFCs have become de facto standards. So it's not a top-down model, and that's what makes it very interesting, that independently of each other, lots of people decide to adopt some RFCs, to not adopt other RFCs, and working without any kind of coordination, the internet still manages to work out.
Okay, in 1970, the network control protocol is finished. So I already explained the protocol. So now we have the first basic thing that two computers can talk to each other. So applications are developed. The first three applications we had was Telnet, which connected computer to each other, FTP, which connect information, that's the file transfer protocol, and email. You all know that. It was connecting people. And actually, email was the so-called killer application. It has 75% of the usage rate. There were 2,000 ARPANET users at that point of time. But more and more local networks were connecting to this network of networks. And they just found out that the NCP is unusable because of no acknowledgement. So when you remember the picture of the network and the packets, so the packets will get lost somewhere on the way. So you need to have an answer from the other computer who's saying, okay, I got your packets now, so you can stop sending them. So this is acknowledgement. So nowadays, so they, Windsurf and Bobcan started in New Days, which is the transmission control protocol, which got split a few years later in TCP/IP, which maybe the techies of you already heard about. And this one will make that acknowledgement. So my computer sends a package to a web browser. Hey, web browser, I want to see your website. And I will send it as long as the web browser is going to answer me, okay, you can have your website. And the next step is going to be, okay, I answer, okay, I got your answer. And then he will give me the website. This happens every time you click a link.
So, and now generally this thing that came about in 1978, TCP/IP, is usually the basis of the definition of the internet, that stuff which uses this particular protocol, the transmission control protocol / internet protocol, is what the internet is. And so that is a very important point in the evolution of the internet.
So a few years later already mailing lists and discussion groups arose. And in 1975 there is one special point I want to highlight, because there was the first list, the science fiction lovers. It was the first non-technical list. So all the lists and discussion groups were discussing the development of that infrastructure. And some guys started to have the science fiction lovers group, and it got banned first because the others said it is not necessary for research, it's waste of space and bandwidth, and so you're not allowed to do that. But they were discussing it, and it got the permission as a pilot because so many people were interested to use it. So the techie said, that's going to be a challenge for us, so let's try it out. And this is actually the first documented appropriation of the new space for leisure and entertainment, because there we're talking about science fiction, like literature and movies and everything. Then also a few years later, the Usenet and the bulletin board systems started. This is also called the ARPANET for the people. The Usenet and also the BBSs are nearly non-restricted public spaces. Everyone is able to read and write, so everyone can join. Everyone with a computer and an internet, at least, which was back then not that much people. And it's also good to know that the organization and rules are done by the users for the users. So again, the users are the developers at the same time. And also as a side note, the multi-user dungeon started in that time. That was text-based online role-playing games.
And one interesting point here is some stuff started off in 1979 still exists. So Usenet is still up and running, and people still use it. Not as much anymore, of course, but yes. And MUDs are still very much active, and so BBSs, unfortunately, I haven't heard of people using BBSs in a long time. But when we look at the Indian history, we'll see how the important role of BBSs in actually creating consciousness of the internet in India.
Yeah, so the BBSs were really important for the people not being in a science institute, not being in the military, for using the internet. Also, the other applications, the first one, Telnet, is still used sometimes, because today you don't need it that much anymore, but it is still used. FTP is really commonly used. Maybe one of you guys already used it. Yeah, okay, there are some. And yeah, email every one of you is using, because otherwise you won't be here, I guess. In 1979 as well, there were a lot of those services for the people, like the bulletin board systems. And so the service provider, they started to do their own networks as well. So there was, for example, the British Postal Service who launched the Prestel, which had around 90,000 users. And the next couple of years, there were many of them appearing. So this was the internet before the internet. So this was small networks. They were closed. They were not connected to each other. So this is what I explained before, that in this time, if you have a Gmail address, you can just write to Gmail, to other Gmail users. So you're not able to write to my CIS address, because you are in that network, and you can just use services in that network. So I have some examples there. In France, there was, for example, online banking and travel reservations, so stuff you do till today. And they had 26,000 different services, and there were 25 million people using it.
And interestingly, Minitel ran all the way till last year. In 2012 was when it finally, the last Minitel computer was decommissioned. So these have had quite a long run, and they created, in a sense, the demand for the commercial internet that would start off later. So most of these services are commercial, it might be noticed. So
yeah. So also the Bildschirmtext, for example, this was done through television. So you didn't even needed a computer for that. 1983, on 1st January, there was the transition from the NCP, the old protocol without the acknowledgement, to the TCP/IP. And the problem was that all hosts had to do it at the same time. So there was this button everyone was wearing like really proudly, because it wasn't that easy to make that transition. And I also picked out some numbers just to get an idea how many hosts means like a server, like computers you can connect to, how fast it grows. So it was double over a year, and yeah, we are in 100,000 like 5 years afterwards. In the same year, the ARPANET splits into the military MILNET and the scientific ARPA Internet, because the militaries, they were just like going crazy about all the people running around in that network. So at this point of time, it wasn't even only the scientists, but a lot of people from outside. So they were just like, okay, we have to split it up. And Milnet, yeah, sure thing, got the most nodes. But yeah, the ARPA internet was run by scientific institutes, so it was still running. So in 1984, the domain name system was invented. It was actually the first step towards usability, because the domain name system means that you have addresses which are not numbers anymore. So before you had to address an IP address. So you had to remember a number with 12 digits. And the domain name system makes you that you can write a word instead of the number, like internet-institute.in, which refers to an IP address, but you don't have to remember the IP address, but you can remember that name easily, and this is what the domain name system does.
And at any point, if any of you have any doubts or clarifications, please interrupt us right now so that we'll be able to explain that. And the one interesting consequence of the domain name system is that the internet, as we know, is very decentralized. But the domain name system, which, as we'll find out later, is now run by an organization called ICANN, is the only centralizing part of this entire network. And it actually needn't be. So right now, for instance, you can access addresses ending in .com, .net, .org, .in, and all of these that you do know. But there are, in other domain name systems, not run by ICANN, things like .play, etc., which normally you can't access. So the entire point of the internet, as we saw, was to allow incompatible networks to be able to talk amongst each other. To allow, for instance, a gmail.com user to be able to talk to a CIS-.org user. But the domain name system doesn't allow for that. It is the most centralized part of the internet, and as we'll learn later, it actually leads to lots of political ramifications in terms of who gets to control the domain name system.
The scientific institutes, they founded the NSF-net because, yeah, the MILNet was not there anymore, so they had to do a lot of new backbones, a lot of new nodes, which are going to be the backbone of the new internet. So the backbone is basically the autobahn of the internet. So the big wires connecting the big nodes to each other. So you are not directly connected to a backbone, but you are connected to some box down here. The box down here is connected to some box in Bangalore, and the box in Bangalore is connected to another box to Mumbai, and this could be the backbone, because Mumbai have the wires from the sea cables, and this is the backbone as well. So as your backbones, actually. Yeah.
So, and perhaps possibly in one of the later sessions, you'll learn about the multiple tiers of internet networks. And generally what we refer to as the backbone of the internet is tier 1 companies. And then there are tier 2, tier 3. Most of us on a normal basis interact with ISPs, which are tier 3 level players, etc. And this is very important because this provides the multi gigabit at that point of time, and now the multi-terabit network, which is required, to which other ISPs connect. So it's not as though NSF-net was the only player at this point of time, but it was what everyone else connected to, or at least in the context of the US, everyone else connected to in order to be part of this network of networks.
So in 1988, the Internet Relay Chat System arose. This is also just an example for one of the services the Internet provides besides the World Wide Web, which is still not existing at this point of time. It's a decentralized chat system. Anyone can start own rooms, and it was just developed by a Finnish student who thought, oh, it would be a nice idea to have something like this. So IRC is widely used until today, just as an example. So,
And if any of you want to connect onto the CIS IRC channel and chat with any of us, you can just go to a server called Freenode and use hash CIS_India as the channel name, and you'll be able to log into a chat room where the rest of us are present generally.
yeah, and we are happy to help you with that because I'm gonna be here the whole week. So if anyone's interested to have a look into IRC, just yeah, come to me. In 1990, the ARPANET is switched off. But the user does not reckon this at all because the scientific network is existing, so the user doesn't get it. Also, Gopher starts. It's a system similar to the web, and it gets important when the real web is invented. That's why I'm going to mention it here. There were plenty of those systems, actually, but Gopher has an important part. Also in 1990, Tim Berners-Lee, a guy who was living in Switzerland, working at the CERN, he wrote an application called World Wide Web. Maybe you heard about that. I have a quote. I happened to come along with time and the right interest and inclination after hypertext and the internet has come of age. The task left to me was to marry them together. This is a quote from his biography, which is really interesting, by the way. And so hypertext already existed. People wrote documents where you can click on a link and you will spring to another point of the document, or maybe even on another document in the same folder, but not via the internet. So he is now really famous for inventing the World Wide Web, sure thing, but he's always saying, no, actually I was just not, so my idea wasn't that great. It was just hypertext was there, the internet was there, and I just connected them to each other. This was quite easy. But yeah, we are kind of glad that he did it. And when he started to do this, people started to develop a lot browsers, but they haven't started to develop editors. So the idea of Tim Berners-Lee and editing, but it happened differently, as we all know. So the users, they are consumers now. So maybe some of you remember the old times in the 19s when we had those websites with the cat content and everything. So it was like television. You were browsing around. If you found the time, you could like make your own website and providing some pictures of your cats. But you were not able to comment, to add, to share, to re-quote the stuff. You have been just a consumer on that World Wide Web back in the 19th. Want to add something?
No, and just that most of us, when we talk about the internet, generally are talking about the World Wide Web, the stuff that we access when we launch, you know, Firefox or Google Chrome or Internet Explorer, and then type some addresses and get to. So all of that is actually the World Wide Web. Whatever you access through the browser is the World Wide Web. Whereas the internet, as Bernadette pointed out, is much larger than that. There are lots of protocols that exist outside of the World Wide Web that are still very popular today. And peer-to-peer traffic, for instance, isn't part of the World Wide Web. Okay, BitTorrent, etc., isn't part of the World Wide Web, but is very much a part of the internet. So this distinction, which most of us don't draw most of the time, is actually quite an important distinction. But it is also the fact that this treating one as a synonym for the other actually comes about because it is the World Wide Web that makes the internet a mass product in a way that catches people's imagination, a few years down the line, and actually gets them to want to have these things called modems, fax modems at that point of time, and to actually connect to this thing. And you had a question? Do we have one more? Could we please? Because it's being recorded, right? Yes. No, but it's also being recorded, so I think for that we need the mic, or you can just use this.
No, I just want you to explain a bit more about why are peer-to-peer technologies and torrents are not part of World Wide Web. What's the reason behind this? It's like
Because the World Wide Web is using the HTTP protocol, which is, yeah, one service of the internet, and the torrent is using the torrent protocol, which is another service of the internet. So it is just like going by car or going by bus. This is just different ways of transportation on the same. So what they have in common is that they use the same wires.
Yeah, they use the same roads,
Yeah.
but they're different. So when you're connecting using torrents, you're actually not connecting through the things which were defined earlier, right? This hypertext transfer protocol, which Tim Berners-Lee comes up with. Things like HTML, the hypertext markup language, which Berners-Lee again comes up with, right? So these are, in a sense, part of the definition of the internet, especially the hypertext transfer protocol. Okay. No, it doesn't exclude one from interacting with the other, in a sense. That you can, but you need to implement them in a particular way. So the same program can possibly be used to download something from HTTP, to download something using FTP, and to download something using torrent protocol, using these three separate protocols in the same program.
Yeah.
But they don't really talk to each other because, as we established right at the beginning, a protocol is basically a way of getting two people to be talking at the same wavelength. Okay? But these being separate protocols, all of which use TCP/IP and things like UDP, etc. So these are specialized protocols which run on top of the more basic protocol, and so the basic protocol allows talking between different networks, etc. And these separate protocols, okay, allows talking between two different computers on transfer of files, for instance. So.
Yeah, we also have it the other way around. So maybe some of you guys using for email an email client, an application, maybe on your mobile phone or on your computer. So you have an application checking your email and sending your email. So there you're not using HTTP but SMTP and IMAP, and or most probably IMAP. But you also have the possibility to go, most of the times, to log into some kind of webmail service of your service provider. So you type in mail.the-domain.top level domain, and there you are able to check your emails as well, and you're also able to send them. So the HTTP is used as a layer, but the email is still sent by SMTP, by the simple message transfer protocol. Yeah, it's not that simple actually, but yeah, mail. So there you have it the other way around. So is it clear? Okay. So you can just interrupt us anytime. In 1990, also the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority was invented.
So as we saw with the DNS system coming about, and the fact that with the IP address system as we had then, which now we call IPv4, which has a 12-digit number. Okay, it only gave rise to around 4.5 billion different addresses Okay, only 4.5 billion. Okay, but by the late 90s itself, they realized, by the late 80s itself, they realized that this was going to be a problem. So in the 80s, what was happening was this one gent working in University of California, Berkeley, if I remember right, called John Postel. He was just doing the assignment himself. And in 1990, something called IANA is created, which he heads, which is a formalized way of assigning blocks of addresses to different entities. And this is also one of the historical moments of the internet, because again, this is in a sense a centralizing force, right? Because it relates to numbers and names. And what ends up happening here is that some institutions in the U.S., including academic and military institutions, which don't need that many addresses, get a large chunk of the addresses, leaving much less for the rest of the world. Okay, and eventually in the rest of the world we have things called regional internet registries coming up, which help, in a more fair and equitable kind of distribution, which wasn't happening under IANA. But at that point of time, they didn't have any reliable ways of knowing how many IP addresses any given organization would need, etc. And so, yes, at that point of time, this comes about. And again, as we noted with the domain name system, the domain name system works because of something called the root zone, okay, which basically contains the authoritative list of what name is defined by whom. So it, in a sense, allows for the authoritative mapping of 117.292.68.3 to equal google.com. Okay, so and everyone else, different ISPs, they in a sense work off this root zone. Okay, now IANA at that point of time is in control of the root zone, and hence is in control of the entire domain name system itself.
Okay, and also the Internet Society started, which is also some organization like this.
So ISOC is started at this point in time by all the scientists primarily and engineers who have been behind so far the creation of the internet. And so it initially has multiple, so its mission is to ensure the growth of the internet, but it works through multiple sub-bodies, including something called the Internet Architecture Board, including something called the Internet Engineering Task Force, which some of you might have heard about, the Internet Research Task Force, the Internet Research Study Group, the Internet Engineering Study Group, etc. And this is seen as a form of governing the internet without involving governments. So this is a first tab in 1992 at the notion of internet governance, and without any kind of explicit talk about governing the internet. So it's all about self-regulation without saying that these are what we are regulating against.
1993, the media and press business world starts slowly to reckon that there is this thing called the internet and the web, because the web was really back then also the killer application. And now Gopher comes here again. I told you before, the web similar service. they started to charge licenses fees for their service. And in April, the CERN, the employee of Tim Berners-Lee, gives permission for a free and open World Wide Web, which Tim Berners-Lee describes really nicely in his biography, how glad he was. So he was really, really afraid when he heard about that Gophers charges the license fees. And so because he developed it at the CERN in his time he got paid for, so everything he developed belongs to the CERN. And so he was really, really glad when the CERN gave the permission that the web's going to be free and open.
So at 1993, you see that the people who are using this outside of the scientific community are, for instance, there are a number of movements, including the global environmental movement that is using the internet, and they see the internet at that point of time as being a way of communicating and being able to do through things like Usenet and news groups, things that that help them build global communities. Okay, which and until then they'd been using fax machines. Okay, to actually relay news quickly, and this is cheaper at one level than a fax machine. And in 1993, also interestingly, The Economist starts off its internet services through Gopher at that point of time, and so a few media houses also start looking at this. So the global consumer rights movement, the global environment movement, etc. start off. There are bodies such as the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which starts off there to press for civil rights online and rights for hackers, and so a whole lot of that is happening in the late 80s, early 90s, and the fact that the World Wide Web and all core internet technologies exist without any form of patenting is a crucial aspect of of it being what it is today. And we'll also see that eventually, when the World Wide Web Consortium is created in '94, that one of its core rules is that all people who submit standards to it, okay, for adoption, etc., must not assert any patent rights over those standards, that they must be royalty-free standards. And this is unlike, say, other bodies such as the ISO, etc., which allow you to charge a reasonable and non-discriminatory fee for patent royalties. The World Wide Web Consortium, on the other hand, says no royalties if you want to be part of this standards making process.
Organization. My name is Madan Mohan Rao. When an organization like this becomes like full time, and then there are no royalties and thing, how does it generate its funds, like in this worldwide consortium to run itself? How does that happen?
So different bodies earn the money for running differently. The W3C has membership fees. There are some other bodies that require special payment for conferences. So IEEE runs a lot on the conference model. W3C runs, and plus membership also. W3C runs on a membership model, membership fee model. So they're charging royalty fees anyway normally doesn't come to the body. Okay, royalty fees normally go to each of the participating companies. Okay, but they put this as a barrier to participation, saying if you want to participate in our standards making process, then you must not charge people for it. Which is why certain kinds of formats, such as GIF, okay, GIF for image, never went through the W3C process, okay, because it was encumbered by patents, which in the beginning when it became popular, no one asserted, but in 1998, one or two lawsuits were filed trying to get money out of patents relating to GIF. Okay, so at that point of time, W3C came up with something called PNG, okay, as an alternative which didn't step on anyone's rights.
In 1995, we have those AOL and CompuServe and Delphi Wallet Garden services, which is a closed network in the network as well as we had it before with the what was it called? Yeah.
So for instance, at this point of time, something called CompuServe exists in the US, which has been expanding its reach elsewhere as well to compete with things like Mininet in France, for instance, Minitel in France, for instance. And CompuServe runs on its own proprietary network. It isn't connected at this point of time to the general internet, whereas through AOL, initially they ran over TCP/IP, but were a closed, walled garden. In a way that, for instance, you might see Facebook as being a walled garden, that you could communicate. You had lots of services being present within AOL. They'd gotten in touch with lots of corporations to set up sites on AOL's networks, but you know, and they did have some amount of success in this, and they still actually get revenue from people who subscribe to them in the 90s, and there was an article in the press recently about how some of the older generation don't realize that they don't need AOL to send emails. Okay, so they have an internet connection through cable or DSL, and they keep their AOL connection alive still. Okay, and it earns around 43% of its revenue still through those subscribers. Okay, quite interestingly. But this, in a sense, is an alternative to the open web. Okay, the open web, you don't need permission to get on it. Anyone can set it up. People can communicate with each other from any network to any other network because the web is an open protocol. Whereas these are commercial services which aren't open, which are walled gardens, allow people to communicate only within their own networks, and eventually we see that they fail, and the web takes over at this point in time.
Yeah, I think it's also to add that there were also computer fabric companies. So guys who made the hardware of computers, and they made their own network as well. So for example, with this kind of laptop, I can, okay, laptops wasn't there back then, but I can connect to that network, but only with this kind of hardware. If I'm going to buy another computer from another company, I'm not able to use that network anymore.
And so it's around this point between 94 and 96 that general awareness of the web starts building up, and because of the web, the internet starts building up, and people start taking note of it. And at this point, we'll take a break for around half an hour, Nirmita, till 11:30, at which point we'll continue.
Anyone knows there are some missing people, or is it just some shifting in the seat, man? No. Okay. So we will wait for another 2 minutes or so. Shall we wait or shall we go on? I think it's 2 people still missing. Yeah. Okay. So what I want to add, I just reckon in the break about some questions, is that what we are presenting here, the history of the internet, is actually the part of the history which is well documented. So all this we are telling you about, you will find in scientific papers, you will find, yeah, documentation on that. But the part that is not documented is what the people did, the hackers did. For example, the BBS system, which we just run through briefly. This was just guys having a computer at home, and people could log into that computer, get messages, log off again, and they offline read the messages and maybe write something, log in again, and like send and receive the messages. But this is something we have no documentation about this yet, so that's why we just mention it briefly. And there is a lot of stuff like this more. So I just know from my German friends that they, back in the old days when they found some computer, maybe at some company or scientific institute, they installed some chat software there. And so every time they found a machine, they were looking for that chat software. If it was there, they logged in. If not, they installed it. And so they just used to meet the same people on different machines all over the world. But this is just what they told me, so I cannot refer on that. So just to let you know that there is most probably a lot of more things happened, and we are just going along the documented way. So now I'm going to do a little recap, because I would like you afterwards to, every one of you, to point out the three most, for you personal, the three most important points till 1995, where we just ended with a break. So I will do a quick recap so you have the chance to go over it again. And also, it would be quite nice if, I just reckon that some of you guys are, seem to be really technical. And so if you want to add something, feel free. Also, maybe some stuff you experienced on your own, which I just said, which we don't have documented. So if you just have some story to tell on one part of time, just interrupt us and say, okay, I was there and I tried this out, and yeah, I have this story to tell. Or if you have anything else to add, yeah, just do so. So yeah, just briefly, this was the introduction. The Sputnik shock, which was the start of the ARPA, the first thoughts, then the packet switching excursus, then the first part where the people came together working on the same idea. The first computers are connected and the RFC started, so this is the RFCs. The MCP is used, and the first applications are in use, Telnet, FTP, and email. Yeah, more and more networks, and the start of the TCP, which went to the TCP IP afterwards. The first, yeah, appropriation of the new space for entertainment. Then the Usenet and the BBS as the ARPANET for people, and the MATS also for entertainment stuff. All the other networks in the network. The transition and the ARPANET split. The domain name system. The new backbone of the new internet. The IRC. Switch off of the ARPANET and starting of the Gopher. Tim Berners-Lee having this idea of the World Wide Web. The IANA, the Internet Society, media and press starts to reckon, and the World Wide Web gets free and open. The first WC3C conference. Also again, this closed networks, the walled gardens inside of the network. Yeah, and here we finished. So yeah, I will write down here whatever you think is the most important point. And also, if you have a point where you think, okay, that sounded interesting, but I really didn't get it, so we can talk about this again. So I don't know, someone wants to start as a volunteer, or shall we just start in a row? Hmm? Okay, thank you. RFC. Yeah. Yeah, as we're going to record everything, maybe you have seen the video man there. It would be good to have the microphone, sorry for that. Yeah. So RFC is your most important point.
Next.
Okay, so maybe you just go on to the next person. Yeah, that'll be great.
Uh, this is very difficult, in fact, to repeat myself, because I thought, I mean, that's the initial whatever stage for developing protocols, and that largely later became internet. So and the open public whatever. That's
For me, it was the the combination of hypertext and internet, because it gives yeah. So because it led to people, the hypertext and internet, how it was, they were combined. Yeah. So because it gives right to users to comment and participate in the whole communication game.
Decide somebody. Now I'm going to pick on people.
I think for me it has to be W3C's decision to make the internet, free and open, because I think that was one of the most important points that led to what we have today. So I think for me that would be it.
Decide.
Yeah, I think IRCs and bulletin boards, because right in I think 91 and 92 we implemented as an experimental basis within the company. And you could see a major change in terms of how people started communicating and also documenting some of the conversations. I think that, okay, at that time it was called Tata Unisys. Okay, Tata Burroughs Unisys, part of Tata's. In fact, at that time we also got a Class B address and all that sort of thing.
Okay, so I made another point for the RFCs.
What I think the main thing is more at the methodological levels. One is the decentralized nature of the architecture. So that is a key thing to the growth. And second is there was no government intervention or regulation that controlled, which is actually the same thing, the other side of decentralization. And the third thing is the decision not to permit patenting. So it really ensured, kind of the widest usage and, whatever could happen thing. And there's no restriction on access, who accesses. And I mean, these are methodological issues, and of course at the technology level, it is the marriage of the hypertext with the internet at a technology level. But I think you have to see the difference between method and technology and the interface of these particular things at different times.
I won't say it's important, but what got my imagination or my attention was this science fiction lovers. Uh, they were banned initially. I'm not interested in the ban. I think what we need to understand is you said they posed a challenge to the techies, and I would really like to know how this challenge was met. You know, what was the exact challenge of science fiction lovers and how it was met.
So the challenge was actually that the discussion groups used to be kind of small. They were discussing a few topics and just a few people. And that science fiction lovers, they started to be a small group as well. But as everyone started to discuss the group, it got a lot of attention. And yeah, it's just that bunch of people who are interested in such literature. So the science fiction lovers group got really big in a really short time. So it was the biggest group in the whole network. And that's the reason why it was the challenge. Because the techies said, yeah, we never had this before, that so many people are using the same group. So we should stick on that. And don't mind what they're talking on. But we will have this as a pilot for such a big, huge amount of people using the same group.
Thing that I'd like to think is the instinct of survival. See the ARPANET, the reaction to Sputnik and the fact that, what happens if a data center gets destroyed, so how do you, get back, that kind of thing. And if you find there's a parallel to that, and why Indians are very good at, the thing, the architecture of the internet is very similar to the Indian caste system. Huh? Yeah, because the protocols are very, very well established. Who you marry, where you live. So, and then you can never get destroyed. Even if one village, the entire village gets wiped out, you can always, the community can't be wiped out. And then when you travel, there were protocols of establishing your identity. So there was no concept of a hotel. So you always landed in the next village and the next village, and you identified with the community to which you belong, and the habits, your food habits, your clothing habits, your other cultural things could always establish who you were, just like you do it on the net. So these protocols were very things. So there is a thing between, and the internet is only about 20 years old. The Indian caste system is 2000 plus, so, and it's still going to last much longer. So I'm just saying the protocols for a thing are kind of similar.
Yeah. I just wonder if this word exists in English. Robust? Yeah?
Robust.
It's German, so I think this is the point, isn't it? That design is robust. So, oh, sorry. So it's, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because there is that rumor that the internet was made by the USA to have a communication infrastructure in any case of attack. So as you know, or already learned, the internet is a network, and when you imagine that, oh yeah, there it is. So this picture again. So can I have your mic, please? So here's a bigger part. So we are, for example, now in this hotel. Every one of us connected to the internet is connected to that point, which is that point. And this is connected to the box down the street. And then you want to click a server, which is in the USA, so it's kind of there. And so you go through all the networks. And maybe it happens that one of the wires on the way is broken, like physically broken. So your packet goes that way, and it's just like in Indian traffic. You see, okay, I cannot go there, so I just take the right side and try my way around of it. So the network is robust. Um, and even if there are a lot of nodes, for example, so in the rumor they said for nuclear attack. So imagine there would be like half of the nodes. It would be still possible to get from that point to that point because there are so many roads. But you will not so you're not able to take the autobahn anymore because this one is destroyed. But the highway, okay, sorry. You're not able to take the highway or the flyover anymore, but you can take the small streets around because they are still existing. Yeah, and what I want to point out is that this rumor that the USA invented the internet for that special use case, having a nuclear attack and still able to communicate, that's not true. So what I explained before, it was just, they just said, okay, we need to do something which is like greater and bigger than the Sputnik. So
and one of the core points of the internet as we know it now is this thing called the end-to-end principle, right? So that is sometimes also called the dumb pipes principle, that at the network layer, you don't really, the packets don't really need to know what they're carrying. Okay, all they need to know are the address and the route. Okay, and that allows them to go where they need to go. They don't need to know much else. They don't need to be intelligent. So all the intelligence, in a sense, on the internet is really located at the edges, okay, at the ends, on people's computers, etc., which will take, you know, these very basic packets and will make sense of them. Okay, but on the most of the network itself, you don't really need an intelligent network. It's fine to have dumb pipes, okay, and that is actually one of the, it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's actually one of the reasons for the success of the TCP/IP protocol and the internet as we know it. So that's the and so what one other thing about packet switching, just to explain how the robustness of the internet comes about, is that when you send out a message, that single message is broken up into multiple packets and is sent not all necessarily through one route. These packets can take different routes as well. Okay, and at the end they can be reconstituted. They can all make sense again as that singular message at the end. But while it's going through the network, okay, if one packet doesn't make it through one particular route, finds out one server is down, which it expected to be up, okay, so it'll, instead of taking that relay, it'll go through some other route, and that will enable it to reach its final destination. This is again something that is there in TCP/IP, okay, but is not there in other protocols such as NCP, in UDP, etc., which don't have this error correction mechanism built into them.
to add this, so every packet, you can just imagine every packet has a number. And so if I write an email, it's 100 of packets. Every packet has a unique ID, and my server will send those packets, yeah, as long as it will get the answer. So if one packet will not find the way and go through, and then maybe it's the first packet which was on the way, but it will be the last one arriving, so the server will say, no, I don't take you because I already have you, like a copy of you. And so it just got dropped. So that's, by the way, one of the reasons why privacy is also so important, because all those packages, they are just flying around in the network. They are just like going somewhere. They're taking different routes, and everyone who's sitting on those nodes can just grab them and read them. That's totally easy to like read your email somewhere on the way. But this just as a side note. So anything else to add on our list of the most important things?
For me, two things. The fact that it was initially government-based as a response to a crisis or to a challenge from another government shows that sometimes unintended consequences unintended investments have bigger consequences. But it has sometimes these investments are needed from top down. Sometimes the resources are just too huge for bringing those ground changes. And secondly, for me, even though DNS is very centralized, as someone was saying, I think it still played a major part in sort of democratizing knowledge. The challenges, the names are still in English. We also face the same problem in planning is we need to, hopefully the hope is that the names start getting into vernacular so that people start getting engaging with what they want to produce rather than sticking to learning English and then adopting those models. So for me, DNS still continues to play a very crucial role in taking internet from outside engineers, labs, to the common man, even though it's still in English. So.
Yeah.
The first internationalized domain name was launched. So now you can actually have domain names in a number of different languages, including Arabic, including Hindi, including Tamil, including and languages meaning these scripts. So so far we've been restricted to the Latin script, but you might now come across increasingly so I would expect addresses with in the Chinese Mandarin script, in Arabic, in Hindi and Tamil, etc. Also, and the only non-native part of these addresses is the dot. Okay, and so dot Bharat, for instance, exists as in the Hindi script right now, and it is functional. So anyone can actually register that through Nixie. So.
The subdomains and the top level domains still remain? You mean the top level domains still remain Latin letters? Yeah. No. Yeah.
Even GTLDs, the generic top-level domains, are available in non-Latin scripts right now. So that's part of the core definitions of the IDNs, as they're known, the internationalized domain names, and that's also taken care of. And there are multiple ways to input this. So if you can't use your own keyboard, if it doesn't support a non-Latin layout, for instance, you can use online keyboards, etc., to enter stuff as long as it's not too tedious. And so there are ways of actually doing so. The main problem, though, with non-Latin scripts right now is search. Okay, it's actually more than the difficulty of actually accessing the addresses and stuff. It is accessing information. The search engines aren't good enough in other languages. Okay, and that is so. There are a few. Yandex and Baidu, of course, are the two biggest non-Latin script-based search engines. But apart from that, we don't have good search capabilities in other scripts. That becomes a big part of the problem of why this hasn't taken off.
Yeah. And there's just one thing I want to add for the DNS. You can imagine it as a phone book where names are connected to numbers. And we could, in this group, for example, we could set up our own DNS server. That would mean we make a copy of the existing DNS, and then we could add an address for every of your computers. So we are in the same network, and I can also, I have to tell my computer that it has to use that particular DNS server, which we set up, and then I can like reach your laptop with your name, for example. So we can have then own top-level domains as much as we want to have, because we're doing our own DNS server. So just for additional understanding. So now we go on. We have 1996 now, and you already know that this is the time where the general public at least got aware of the internet. So maybe one of you guys remember that time. This was the time where, like, in that years, we used to start having internet at home in the late 90s. So there were a lot of people coming into that world, if you want to say it like this. And there's John Perry Barlow. He's one of the founders of the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And he wrote a declaration of the independence of cyberspace. It was written really spontaneously. There was something happened in the USA, and he was like really annoyed and angry, and he just sat down and wrote this. I really recommend to read all of it, but I will read out loud the first paragraph. Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. We have no elected government, nor are we likely to have one. So I address you with no greater authority than that with which liberty itself always speaks. So he presented that in Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace in Davos at the World Business, I don't know the English, economic, yeah. And it is highly quoted since today. So yeah, the reason was the USA government just made some law where they wanted to restrict that people are saying bad stuff on the internet, like shitty words or so. And this was the reason why he wrote it, and he was really angry about that.
And one thing to note also is that this is immediately after the public internet really comes to India, which happens in '95 through VSNL starting to offer services in six cities across India.
So in 1998, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, the ICANN, was founded by different interest groups like business, engineering, science, and users. Maybe Pranesh want to add some here at the ICANN?
Sure. So this is, in a sense, the start of the contentiousness of the issue of internet governance. ICANN comes about as something that the US government forces down the throat of the internet community at that point of time. Because right at this point, people are debating, there are meetings being held with ITU, ISOC, John Postel's IANA, with people coming from WIPO, etc. to these meetings, and starting to figure out, so how do we actually deal with the number of issues that are being brought up on how to, how to actually do the allocation of domain names, what kinds of domain names are fine, what kinds aren't, how do we say who are the legal representatives of countries who get to control the .in or the .pk, etc. And how do we resolve all these kinds of issues. And while these discussions are going on, unilaterally, the US government sets up through a wing of its Department of Commerce, a thing called the NTIA. It creates a non-profit corporation based in California called ICANN, which provides for representation from uh, multiple communities. The technical community, it includes governments in something called the GAC, the Government Advisory Committee. It includes, at that point of time, as you could see from the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, there is a kind of notion of netizen that is building up, right? So it includes netizens at large through something called ALAC, and so it includes a number of different constituencies, all of whom come together at ICANN. So it represents these multiple interest groups. So it's seen as the beginning of multi-stakeholder governance of the internet. But as we'll realize once we get to the World Summit on Information Society in 2004, from 2003 onwards, that numbers and names are only one small part of internet governance, that there are many more issues at stake, and ICANN is only one small part. So, but this is the start of fights between different countries and different governments for how the internet is run. And this is the solution that the US government found. And one more thing I'll say about it, in 1998, it first released this white paper and then created ICANN and entered into a contract with ICANN, this private company called VeriSign, to which it gave the right to run .com and .net at that point of time, and IANA as well. Now, in 2009, if I recall correctly, they modified that contract and entered into a new contract called the Affirmation of Commitments. Now, that contract is far better than what used to be. Okay, so at the initial contract allowed the US government to exercise control over ICANN, to have final say over the root zone. Okay, and allowed the US government a higher say than others. Okay, but that is not the case anymore. Now the US government is just one other government. It has the final authority over the root zone, but it has so far, from 98 till now, never exercised, never taken any decision that goes contrary to what the ICANN board itself comes about. They have tried .xxx, which is now in litigation but is operational as well. That is something the US government voted against at ICANN. And because of the might of the US government, that new domain name coming in to force was postponed by many years. But eventually, they still didn't, say we have this ultimate authority and we can overrule ICANN and we won't allow for it. They eventually, realized that their opinion and the opinion of many other governments, conservative governments, didn't win the day. The ICANN board ruled to allow for .xxx, and eventually that is now the state. The US government couldn't or didn't overrule what ICANN decided. So that's a very interesting set of state of play in a way, where the US government has nominal power, but since 98 it actually hasn't ever exercised that power over ICANN.
There was a question down there.
Not really a question, just something to add here. I think since we are only talking about domain names right now, but I think this raises a larger question about basic jurisdiction and the governance of the internet, not just domain names but information as well, because a lot of governments have now started exercising control over what information is allowed in their jurisdiction, in their country. And that is also a question a lot of internet activists and basic internet users alike have been raising about how this jurisdiction should not apply, because this is technically not in the physical space of the country. So I think this is also a question which has been in my personally in my head, and this is something that I would like to read more, or at least hear more about what is then the jurisdiction, and does it apply if I am, say, accessing the internet from India, does it technically apply that I can be controlled about the information that I access, or is it just about the domain names?
I will be talking more about that particular issue on Tuesday when we discuss the free and open internet. So I won't go into detail about it now, but I will just mention some stuff that is relevant from a historical perspective. The issue of jurisdiction is something that law professors and others have been writing about since around 93, even before the World Wide Web really starts off. They start, noticing this thing called the internet, start noticing that there can be cyber crimes, and start writing about how do we resolve this issue of jurisdiction. And initially they do courts do a really bad job of it. Eventually many courts come around in the US and India to one set of theories about how we deal with the issue of jurisdiction, but the fact is we still don't have a good answer to the problem of jurisdiction, because the internet is actually borderless, and you're imposing artificial national boundaries of nation states onto the internet in a way that doesn't really work out. And at least when servers were physically when you're capable of saying a particular server is located in one particular place, then you have some notion of jurisdiction coming around that way. But where are Google servers located? They're all over the world. Okay, and we actually don't know where each server is physically located. That's something they keep secret, okay, for legal reasons amongst others. Okay, so it's actually difficult the more we move away from that geographic model. And as Bernadette pointed out, way back in the 60s, things like time sharing was happening. Okay, so the cloud, as we call it now, existed in the 60s. Okay, things like Salesforce.com, etc., which are models of the cloud, okay, aren't new ideas. They're just old ideas with newer technologies and with more bandwidth and faster CPUs. Okay, so the issue of jurisdiction has been around for a long time. ISOC and some others have tried to have different kinds of answers. Something called the Internet Law Task Force existed for a brief while in the 90s. It was an independent collection of people who, again, like IETF and others, had a loose network and discussions on how to solve legal problems arising from cyberspace. There was something called the Internet Social Task Force, which was under ISOC, okay, which was again saying that we are solving engineering problems using IETF. Okay, we need to address social problems through something else, and that didn't work out. They formally closed it in 2001. eBay, which was an early player, at one point of time had the notion of cyber sheriffs, okay, saying that just as we can't apply offline rules and offline jurisdictions, etc., online, so we'll have online self-regulation through a system of cyber sheriffs, okay, and that eventually didn't work out when, and that did work for a while, okay, and the cyber sheriffs did solve a few community problems, but the moment there was more larger scale defrauding of people, which affected people offline, they saw that an online only model didn't quite work. So that's a long way of saying that it's still a problem and we don't have good answers.
So, in the following years, the internet, or better to say the web, got famous, and a lot of new companies gone public. And towards the end of the century, they were overvaluated by the rising demand. And in March 2000, the so-called dot-com bubble, it bursts and results in a stock market crash. Oh, and there's a German sentence, but it's English in there. Sorry about that. So maybe this is a point where all of you reckon. Something all of you might know as well is Wikipedia, which started in 2001, which arose as a term in 2004 the first time. It is until today not clearly defined. It was invented as a marketing term, but actually the people back then were really glad to have a word. So I think this is already the time where we maybe have been there. I have been there, and it was just something changing in the web. So we had this consumer web before, like television, and now it started that I can like click the edit button at wikis. Oh yeah, by the way, Wikipedia is not wiki. Wiki is just a genre for software, which is MediaWiki, for example, which Wikipedia uses, but there's a lot of other software providing wikis. So if someone says, hey, look it up in the wiki, you just have to answer, oh, in which? So, so the shift was kind of, yeah, it was not really notable, not really, you couldn't touch it, but there was something different. So I could now comment on blogs. I could easily set up my own web page by like 3 clicks and produce content myself. So actually the Web 2.0 went back to the original idea of the many-to-many communication. So users are at least the developing content again. In 2005, the NSFNet internet backbone switched off, what means that the internet is now completely provided by private networks and commercial internet service providers. So there's no scientific backbone, no governmental backbone anymore. That brings us to the topic of net neutrality. Who of you is aware on that topic? So who knows what it is? Okay. Okay, thank you. Even two. The easiest example to explain net neutrality is to take the example of electricity. So we all use electricity often each day. So electricity is also a network, which also has some nodes where electricity gets together, and it is gets to the last point in that tree structure on that plug down the wall. And I am, as a user, I'm able to plug in any machine I like, even if I have the right plug for it, but I can also have adapters, so I can just use the electricity for whatever I want, even evil stuff, if I like to. So the electricity doesn't care what it is used for. It just comes out of the plug, and it just works. Yeah, it just works. It doesn't mind what it's gonna do. So actually, the internet, as Pranesh already explained, is working the same. So we just have these wires, and the wires are transporting actually just zeros and ones over the network. Actually, it's just electricity as well, but yeah. So those wires are just transporting whatever I'm gonna tell it. So the concept of net neutrality says that the service provider should treat all data equally, not discriminating or charging differently by user, content, site, platform, application, type of attached equipment, and modes of communication. But yeah, if the network is neutral by its physical, why do we need this? Why do we even have to talk about net neutrality? So the problem is the bandwidth. So if I'm doing a phone call over the internet, I want to have my phone call packages high prioritized, because you can imagine that it would sound odd if the packages will not arrive in time, and just one's being late and one's coming earlier, so you won't be able to talk to someone over the internet. So actually, the network service provider, they do not treat the data equally, because when I'm doing such a voice over IP phone call, they treat my VoIP packages nicer than the ones from my email. But actually, I'm glad about that, because I don't mind if my email will take 1.111 second or 1.113 seconds. So it doesn't mind. Or also my download, it doesn't mind if the big download I'm doing it take 2 hours or 2.5 hours. But it is important that my voice over IP will be in time. So but the problem is that they, first of all, they have to look into the packages. If we leave that to the service provider, they have to look into the packages. They have to look into what is this package about. Can we like have it on the low lane or on the high lane? And also, it just already starts to be like this, that, for example, big companies, they pay the service provider that they are prioritized. So if I'm a small company and I have a good idea, I would have, like in future maybe, I have to pay to the service provider that my site is reachable at all. Because the other one's having the same idea, just having some more money, his website is better reachable, so you can guess which one will win the game. So, and so net neutrality is a really important topic, and I guess it will be in the next week again sometimes mentioned. But I just want to mention it here because as the internet backbone is now run by service providers, it is important to know that you are kind of depending on what the service provider are going to do with you. So for example, in mobile phones, some mobile phone provider doesn't allow you to make voice over IP because they want you to use the mobile phone to do phone calls. Okay, so we go on. Pranesh, in 2006, there is this Facebook AOL Redux. You wanted to say something about that?
Yeah, so I think what we see with the emergence of sites like Facebook, and especially Facebook, which has hundreds of millions of users now, is quite strange. It takes us back to the days of AOL, to the days of private walled gardens. So what we see is that increasingly, just as AOL contacted different, news channels, entertainment providers, etc., to come set up on their platform to allow people to access that content. Increasingly, Facebook is playing that role, even though Facebook operates on the World Wide Web, but it is in essence a walled garden on top of the World Wide Web, just as AOL was a walled garden on top of the internet. So now, apart from having a separate web presence where you would go to bbc.co.uk, BBC also has a page on Facebook providing lots of those same updates. Now that encourages people to not leave Facebook and go to the World Wide Web, okay, which anyone can set up their own servers. I can set up a web server on this laptop, as a matter of fact, and as a matter of fact, I do have a web server on this laptop. But it's that freedom goes away the moment you get onto Facebook, because Facebook's terms of service, okay, regulates what you can and cannot do, okay, just as AOL at one point did. And we see this increasingly happening, where on mobile phones, smartphones, instead of using the web browser to access content, increasingly people are using apps, okay, which are just modified web browsers, really, in many cases, okay, and present one particular site's content rather than allow for multiple sites to be visited at the same time through a single app called the browser, okay, and that actually acts to our detriment because it gives a single company a kind of control which is precisely what the web takes away. The web throws open based on these simple protocols such as HTTP, HTML, XML, etc. Okay, and what the web actually does in terms of freeing you up to be able to interconnect, the things like Facebook actually take away. So that's something that I thought needs to be highlighted, and the fact that all the information on Facebook, Twitter, and services like these are very often not not stuff that you can claim to be your own because you can't easily remove it. Twitter very recently created a new service which allowed you to back up your tweets. Okay, so to actually take the archive of all your tweets and have it on your own hard drive. Until last month, they did not have such a feature. Okay, for years, people have been using Twitter since 2006 without actually being able to go back to their oldest tweets, or without actually being able to say that all these are mine, I can take them out and use a different service whenever I want to. Similarly with Facebook. Facebook allows export of data, but it's very limited in terms of what it allows you to download. It doesn't allow you, for instance, to download all photos of you on Facebook. Okay, that option is just not available. And things like that. So we're in quite strangely working backwards, as it were, with the emergence of large services like Facebook and Twitter. And Bernadette will also briefly cover things like the Freedom Box, which might potentially, but it remains to be seen, potentially change this.
So we are in 2011 now, and the last IPv4 addresses are given out. So we have, with IPv4, we have this number of addresses, which is a billion or a trillion, or 4 of them. So it's even a lot. So when people invented those address system, they thought it will like least for all times. There will never be a problem because it's so huge amount of addresses and no one will ever use those. But nowadays, so for example, I have this laptop and I have a smartphone, so I'm one person already using 2 IP addresses. Also, I have a couple of servers using IP addresses as well. So actually, there are, maybe 10 IP addresses on my person. I mean, okay, I'm a nerdy guy, so maybe you just have 2 or so, but at least you have some IP addresses on your devices. So this number doesn't service anymore. So IPv6 was invented, the new version of the IP. And this is that amount of addresses, and I don't even know if there's any word for that. A word? Undi?
It's 3.4 undecillion addresses.
Okay, and there were some geeks, they just calculated how many addresses every square millimeter on Earth would have. So you imagine a square millimeter, that's like, like really, really, really small, like a sand corn. And every millimeter of that Earth will already cover as much as addresses. I cannot even say the number as well. So now we also think this will be quite enough addresses for the future. But yeah, we will see how it will turn out. And there are quite some issues on privacy on that new addresses. But I guess this will addressed in the privacy panel on Tuesday, I think. Just that you heard that there's the IP v4. Oh, actually, I should have given a an example. So the IPv4 is that 3 digits, point 3 digits, point 3 digits, point 3 digits. You have seen it before, the IP address. And the IPv6 address, it's quite longer, sure thing, which has 16, yeah.
16 characters, and it's hexadecimal. So it actually allows for many more addresses to be mapped out, for that many addresses to be mapped out. Now, all kinds of implications are there. So now your refrigerator can have its own IP address, but and it will be more and more difficult to target spam on the basis of IP addresses. So there are positives and negatives of IPv6, but the most important thing I think to be noted about IPv6 is how much of a failure it has been in terms of actual adoption, because in the meanwhile, when IPv6 actually came about was 98 or so, 98, I think it was standardized. But at that point of time, we also got other technologies such as network address translation, okay, which allows for someone to communicate with one IP address, but for that to use something internally called NAT and communicate with multiple internal IP addresses. So, so we've had new technologies which even though IPv4 has officially been exhausted, AppNic is out of IPv4 addresses, and IANA is no longer issuing new IPv4 addresses, etc. But our existing store seems to be sufficient to carry us forward for a long while yet, and IPv4 and IPv6 are not compatible with each other. Given that, there seems to be a lot of resistance in terms of moving on to newer routers and changing all the infrastructure required to address both at the software and the hardware level for IP.
Okay, so we will skip on that chronological part now, and what Pranesh already briefly mentioned, the own networks existing. So we have Facebook as kind of a network in the networks, and but there you totally depend on Facebook. So if Facebook is just thinking I don't like you anymore, they can just like block you, and you will lose everything which was in there, everything you wrote in there, every picture. Oh, by the way, you lose the copyright on every picture you upload to Facebook, just to let you know. So I just grabbed out two examples. There are a lot of them. The one is Freifunk.net, which is an international movement for open wireless radio networks. So take this mic again. So actually, it is just people going on rooftops and setting up some wireless antennas. They configuring it. They just actually you can use any old hardware. So every time you get a new contract with your internet service provider, you get new hardware as well. So you can just keep the old one and drop it on your rooftop, and then if you have some of them, so if you're alone, it doesn't make any sense at all. But if you have another friend living nearby, it doesn't have to be that near actually if you can go high. Then you can connect those to each other, like those examples here. So you can make your own network, which is actually not, we had it before that all the networks are based on the networks we already have, like on the same infrastructure. But what you do here is you create your own infrastructure. So for example, if the Egyptians in Cairo would have had such an open wireless radio network, they would have just said, ha if when they shut down the internet back then, like 2 years ago or when it was, because they would have had their own network. So it is run in dozens of countries. I already know some guys in Bangalore who tried to set it up, but they were unfortunately not living close to each other. So if someone of you is interested, we would be happy to connect you to each other. So maybe one of you guys is just living in the middle of those two guys, then you have 3 nodes. Yeah, and the other project is Village Telco. They're doing actually the same thing. They also set up wireless radio networks, but they also have an application for that. So it's just made for phone. It runs in Nigeria, Colombia, Puerto Rico, South Africa, East Timor, and Brazil. And it usually runs in small villages or slums where they don't have any wired phone network. And so they invented that box. You just plug the box, so it's really easy. You just plug the box into the power, you plug the phone into the box, and then you can phone. So you can phone with everyone who's in the same network. And if there is someone in the network who is connecting you to the rest of the world via the internet, for example, you can also phone to anyone of the world so for example, you are down here and you can call anyone here, but you want to go outside, then you call that guy because that's the guy who has the connection to the whole internet. So you call that guy, or his box at least, and this box connects you to the internet. So this is just 2 examples of making an own internet, an own network. And there's another one. This is the Freedom Box Pranesh already mentioned. This, again, plugs into the already existing network. Actually, the basic thing is close to Facebook because it's going to be a network inside of the network. But the big difference is that you plug in the server at your home. So the Freedom Box is actually just a computer, a server. It is a box like small like this. You just plug it into the plug, you plug it into the internet, and then it just serves as a server for personal services. Unfortunately, it's not finished yet, so you cannot buy it or so, but you can have a look if you can help out them that it will work soon. And then you have that box at home. So if you want to, for example, you come back from holiday or you come back from here and you want to share your experience with your friends. So what you do nowadays is you upload your photos to Facebook, you write a blog post on WordPress.com, you Twitter about it all the time, you, use all the services, but this is all services from profit companies, from external ones. So you are really rely on their services. But if you would have such a Freedom Box at home, you could just upload the pictures there, and you could even make different authentication. So you can have pictures which are only allowed for your family to see or for your best friends. You can have pictures which are available on the whole internet. You can have pictures which are available to some part of your address book, like Facebook does as well, but the pictures are still at your home. So if you feel just uncomfortable with that, you can just change. You can just even unplug the box and say, okay, I'm not there anymore. And I really love their mission statement, and it really makes the point, so I will read it out as well. We live in a world where our use of the network is mediated by organizations that often do not have our best interests at heart. By building software that does not rely on a central service, we can regain control and privacy. By keeping our data in our homes, we gain useful legal protections over it. By giving back power to the users over the networks and machines, we are returning the internet to its intended peer-to-peer architecture. Yeah, and that's it.
I mean, the Indian Wireless Act, for instance, how does it bypass that act? No, there is an act in which, you can't use any wireless device. Huh? You cannot use, so the how does that, you know, huh? Sorry? No, this kind of peer-to-peer architecture that you're talking about. So within a legal framework, there is an Indian Wireless Act.
Yes, of course.
So that means your density would have to be less than 25 meters. So, I mean, that would make what you call network.
Sure. So I'll leave it to you to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of setting up your networks, there are one of the elements of internet that if we look at what is the hardware as well as what is the resource, right? So the different ways of transmitting, and it's a mixture of wired and wireless modes of transmission, right? So when we think of the wireless part of it at least, so when we think of how information moves, and we are using radio frequency spectrum. So as far as spectrum is concerned, there are licensed and unlicensed bands of frequency. Most of them are licensed. There are a couple of bands that are unlicensed or delicensed. And those bands are permissible. So you can, and with specifications for how high your tower can be and what you can do. So they use Wi-Fi mesh technologies in that sense to, so that is permissible because it's delicensed. So you're allowed to transmit with restraints on how high your tower can be and the kind of equipment you can have. So it's not outside that domain. No, it's 5.8, 5.4, 2.8 to and to 5.4.
Band which is the ISM band.
Yeah.
So that is allowed without any license.
It was delicensed in 2006. And it's internationally there are bands that are not licensed. So you are allowed in that you're allowed to use that spectrum to be able to transmit. But there are two elements to it, right? One is that you can draw on that spectrum. So if you were to think of drawing water, you have the right to use water. But then you have the right to distribute water. Who distributes it? That's the ISP, the Internet Service Provider license. So there are two different licenses, and within that, if you want to use it for yourself or a community and not for commercial purposes, you don't need the ISP license. You just need to be able to use unlicensed spectrum, and you can't have your infrastructure violate what's considered acceptable in various policies.
So just noting that the last one that Bernadette had mentioned, the Village Telco, that they produce a product called the Mesh Potato that runs just on the Wi-Fi spectrum, on the Wi-Fi bands. Okay, so that doesn't require any kind of delicensing. However, in the US, particularly to address this problem of short range, right? Both the 2.4 megahertz and the 5.8 megahertz ranges, which are delicensed for usage of Wi-Fi and for other things as well. Those have short ranges. Okay, so now what they've done, now there's this new, in a sense, technology that folks are looking at, which is often dubbed Wi-Fi. Okay, which is on white spaces in television spectrum, which are longer range. Okay, so you don't need as many points, okay, within a city to cover, an entire neighborhood. Actually, the entire Redmond campus of Microsoft, which is several dozen hectares, is covered by 3 Wi-Fi devices. Okay, so it's very it has very long reach, and that needs a policy change. On things like Freedom Box, I'll just quickly mention before moving on to the Indian part. Something like the Freedom Box allows you, apart from the infrastructure, which things like Village Telco and Freifunk take care of, Freedom Box allows you to run all kinds of services on your own, instead of depending on companies like Google and Facebook, etc. So they're slightly different visions, slightly different purposes, but both allow you to, take control over your own communications in one way or the other. From here, we'll just wrap up what with this now before moving on to the Indian part. Yeah.
Before we move on, I just wanted to find out that the freedom box that we're talking about, I have two questions about the basic use of it. It is still using the World Wide Web, if I am correct. So it is still using all those services, hence the packets are still there. The only difference in this situation would be that the images and your data will be stored on your own computer, on your own server, which would be actually very much like having your own server on your computer. So it is actually very similar then to having your own server. I guess it simplifies the process of doing that. Is that what it is?
Yes, but not just one server, because there are multiple kinds of things that you do. Everything from social networking to email. So you need different kinds of servers for that. So if the Freedom Box, its goal is to simplify all of that to have one box which acts as your router, which performs many functions and allows you to own your own communications experience.
But would that work with the, for example, if certain kind of content is not allowed in India, supposedly, which has happened in the past, if I am broadcasting or accessing the same information using a Freedom Box, would that still be under? Would that still not be allowed?
One of the points of the Freedom Box is to circumvent those kinds of restrictions, so that you don't, so that intermediaries can't really interfere with, so that Google, etc., don't really have that kind of control, and so that you can take control of your own internet experience. So it is, one of its purposes is to bypass censorship. So I'll just wrap up first with the other presentation and say that what I feel the most important points are when we look at the history of the internet. One is that it's a protocol, right? At the very base, it allows different networks, different devices to all connect to each other. It's very simple. It's at its very base a protocol. Okay? And that is one large part of its success, that it doesn't impose a new standard for networking. Okay? It imposes only a very minimal standard for internetworking. Okay? And that's quite important. The second part is its decentralized nature, right? That you could take out many nodes and the internet would still exist. Okay? And except for a few parts, okay, which are which are centralized not because of any technical or technological restraints, but just because people, all of us, tend to use our ISP's DNS servers or Google DNS, etc., rather than setting up our own DNS servers, which can allow us to connect to other kinds of networks. So and so it's just a fact that it is centralized. It's not a technical necessity. Three, I think one important part of that last presentation is that the internet is actually not an American invention. Okay? Right from the beginning, from the conference in 1967, multiple nationalities were involved. Some of the first test beds were actually not in the US, were in Britain. The first successful products which employ large networking capabilities actually arise outside of the US, in France and elsewhere. Most of it is restricted, of course, to the developing world. So from Asia, the people who are going to these conferences are mostly Japanese folks. Okay, but that being said, there are IRC, which is one of the first big applications, happens all over Europe and the US and Japan and in South Africa and other places simultaneously. So it's not actually an American, solely an American invention. Okay, that is an important point. It might have, TCP/IP might have had roots in DARPA project, but that's it. Okay, a lot more for the internet, whereby pioneers like Louis Poisson and folks from other countries. Okay. Private ownership of the resources. Okay, so this I think is another important point that comes about how the government, without governmental support of projects like DARPA, okay, which weren't oriented towards any specific product, which are research projects, right? Without that kind of governmental funding, we would not have had the internet. Without governmental funding of initial network backbones, we would not have had the internet. But equally, without private sector contributing to a large amount to actually building out services and infrastructure and laying out undersea cables, etc., a lot of which was done by commercial players and not by governments necessarily, okay, we would not have the internet. So it's not, without the government, we definitely wouldn't have it, and without the private sector, we definitely wouldn't have it. So this became a controversy last year with an Wall Street Journal op-ed about how the internet shows the ingenuity of the private sector and how we should keep the government out of it, keep the ITU out of it, etc. While most ITU standards haven't been that very successful online, X25 hasn't been successful, for instance. Okay, but that doesn't mean that the government hasn't played a role in the internet. It has played a very important role. And the problem now also arises that because we have constitutions, etc., that apply, fundamental rights and allow us to have fundamental rights against the government. Now, since more and more of our speech actually takes place over private networks, how do we apply those same rights against private actors? You can't go into a shopping mall and say, I have absolute freedom of speech here, the way you can, in a public park, right? So how do we reconcile the shopping mall kind of nature of the internet, where Facebook's terms of service regulate you, where contracts regulate you, and not constitutions? That's one large challenge, and that's what we explored with talking about the Freifunk and Freedom Box, etc. Now, quickly on to a very, very brief history of the internet in India. I'm actually just presenting the talking points that Madan Mohan Rao has made, so I'll be presenting on his behalf, really. It, in a sense, starts off in 1986 with ERNET, which is the first network that is built out. So, and ERNET comes about through, actually at this point of time, it's not using the internet. It's a network, but it's not connected to the internet in 1986. But email, etc., is still, exchanged using other protocols. 1987, ERNET expands. A new X25 is used, and at this point, TCP is brought about between ERNET gateways, and communication is possible now with outside countries as well. In 88, from X25, the full shift to TCP/IP is made, and this is around the time where not just in India but elsewhere in the world, people are realizing the benefits of TCP/IP. In the US, some X25 networks remain into the 90s as well, but we kind of, surprisingly enough, got onto the bandwagon early. And in 89, VSNL commissions an X25 protocol, GPSS, and slowly more starts rolling out. And apart from the government policy and infrastructure, in terms of community, we see the first BBS, the first bulletin board service, starting off in India. This is the Cyber Info Exchange, which is launched by Atul Chitnis, who passed away recently. But when this launches, in the US already there are 25,000 BBSs servicing many millions of people. And a few other BBSs come up soon after in the 90s. LWBBS, which becomes one of the largest, having establishments in multiple cities, starts up in 91, etc. And and most of these BBSs are local because STD phone calls are still very, very prohibitively expensive. So, and local phone calls are also very expensive, and not everyone has a phone to begin with. But but people did use phones sometimes to make STD calls to, CIX was based out of Bangalore. So people from Pune, etc., would phone in to Bangalore, would download stuff, would then read through it after disconnecting on their own computers, would reply, phone in, have that sent out to the BBS, and this really creates a community around this of techies and in some cases non-techies as well. Around 90 fully TCP/IP is implemented for all communication between ERNET, within ERNET, and LWBBS again starts expanding. In 92, we have ERNET's overseas link, okay, from Bombay to Falls Church, upgraded. And in 93, this is a very important milestone. Business India launches Access, which is a value-added service offering email, news, stock quotes, etc. So around the same time that AOL really starts expanding, in India also we start getting those first services. And this is in the pre-World Wide Web days. In 94, ERNET establishes a hub in Bangalore to provide links over satellite as well. And at this point, there's interestingly talk of a tax on fax modems, which the nascent internet community at that point of time protests very strongly against. And eventually, that tax isn't levied, but that would have been already people were paying very high amounts for the phone calls, and the tax on fax modems very wisely was avoided. The community starts growing. Magazines such as PC Quest and others popularize the existing BBS culture, start popularizing the internet as it exists then. In 95, VSNL starts service in 6 cities. The India World portal is also launched that year. And that is the first major portal launched in India. And soon after that, we have major newspapers getting onto the World Wide Web and setting up websites. Outside of India, in the US, Rediff.com launches and provides services aimed at the Indian community, both initially the Indian community in the US, but then expands to the community in India as well. And India's first cyber cafe also comes about in 95. In 97, we have lots of updates from the commercial sector. So we have non-English content from India getting online with Dinamani setting up its website. Of course, the very famous Sabir Bhatia, who created Hotmail, sells it to Microsoft and becomes a success story that inspires all techies in Bangalore. The first online banking sites is launched by ICICI. We have increased, entertainment-related sites launching like Kale.com. And interestingly, at this point of time, we have the first ISP licensees as well. So Jabberwocky becomes the first ISP licensee, and soon after we have SIFI becoming the first national ISP license holder. And along with this, sorry, I made a slight mistake. This should, Jabberwocky also started up in 1998. Along with SIFI, but SIFI was the first one to have a national license. and at this time, we are having more and more policy-related issues, such as the first major unauthorized access issue, which was surprisingly enough against a very tightly guarded or not very tightly guarded Baba Atomic Research Center, and private ISPs are allowed to set up internet infrastructure. So around this time, in 99, 2000, we also have some free ISPs coming up. I wonder how many people remember Tiger, which was an ISP that provided services in Delhi at least, and it was free. All you had to pay for was your phone connection, and that you weren't paying to the ISP, you were paying to the phone company. So those kinds of models which are pinning their hope on advertisement, were also launching up at that point of time. But still the main mode of access through all this while was the cyber cafe. The community is growing. There are new email groups which are starting up, shifting from BBSs, which are becoming more and more outdated. So things like Silk List, which is a very old list, came up around 96, and it really starts growing. And the India World Conference also starts in Pragati Maidan that year. And commercially, NASCOM is launched thanks to the efforts of Devang Mehta. In 99, we have the new telecom policy, NTP 1999, which very surprisingly recognizes broadband, the definition of broadband, as 256 kbps and always on, which for that point of time is quite revolutionary. And as we see, we don't have many broadband services, and the services that BSNL starts offering then need to be of a very high quality to qualify as broadband. So that's an interesting step taken by the government. And Indian ISPs are allowed to set up satellite international gateways, which until then was a monopoly of VSNL. Commercially, lots of changes are happening, including listing of Indian companies like SIFI outside of India for large market valuations. And a large number of .com companies start appearing in India. Lots of e-commerce sites appear. My colleague Sunil was involved in the launching of one of these, which was a spectacular failure. But lots of companies then immediately faced the .com bubble burst soon after. So in 2000, the Indian Parliament passes the Information Technology Act, which at that point of time is not anything but something that allows for e-commerce, and does so badly. It has some important provisions which include things on evidence, so saying digital evidence is acceptable as evidence. A digital document is a document under the Indian Evidence Act, etc. But apart from that, it doesn't cover all that much. It mostly talks about, the bulk of it is about e-commerce and about digital signatures, etc. And is taken actually from UNCITRAL, which is a law about electronic commerce. Okay, so we basically copy that into Indian law. The Railtel Corporation of India is launched to lay fiber optics throughout India, and cable starts expanding, and ITC sets up its eChaupal initiative to take internet down to the grassroots. Then we see in commercial sector, we see lots of changes again happening, but the important one of that being the coming in of foreign portals like Yahoo and Microsoft into India, and setting up India-specific portals. The community also is growing, the blog, and soon from email groups, it moves on to to blogging, which is a very new thing then. LiveJournal provides a very good blogging platform for, and then Indian community, blogger community is really created on LiveJournal between around 2001 to around 2006. That's very vibrant. And Tehelka.com starts off as an online newspaper, and it launches in a big way with the cricket betting scandal, and looks like things haven't changed all that much at all. In 2001, we have the first arrests for cybercrime, and we have governments starting to use the internet more, with Andhra Pradesh launching an e-procurement portal under Chandrababu Naidu. And we have Indian Railways launching irctc.com, which even now is the largest e-commerce site in India. In 2002, we have a number of other things happening. NPTEL is created, which is the National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning, and that's done by the Ministry of Human Resource Development, the Education Department, and Indian ISPs are allowed to set up submarine international gateways. So, and now, eventually, after VSNL is sold to the Tatas, Tatas are now amongst the largest owners of undersea cables anywhere in the world. So they come within the top 5. And Reliance comes, I believe, within the top 10. I think it's around 11th right now. And very importantly, it owns the Flag network, which at that point in time was the first undersea cable network to circumnavigate the Earth. Okay, so it owns a particularly important undersea cable network. And we have Indian sites expanding, especially on the commercial side. And we have Wikipedia.org coming up in India in 2001, sorry, 2002, and adding all of these subsites. In 2003, the National Internet Exchange of India is set up, and Wi-Fi spectrum, first for A and B, is deregulated for A, B, and G, and N is yet to be deregulated. Was yet to be deregulated, and it didn't actually exist at that point in time. And we have Indian participation at the World Summit on Information Society in Geneva, which India is still is still participating in. And commercially, we see that Airtel, importantly, launches a broadband infrastructure in India in 2003. In 2004, BSNL introduces broadband, and Nixie takes over the management of the .in registry. So that's an important milestone as well. So there's now, so anyone registering .in websites has to follow the guidelines put up by Nixie. Normally, internet exchanges, which is what Nixie is supposed to be, are run in a cooperative manner, and generally are either private companies or are cooperatives, and aren't. But in India, we find that Nixie is actually, while it is supposed to be multi-stakeholder, is actually run by the government, which is not the case in most other countries. And one impetus for the amendment of the IT Act also comes about in 2004, which is Avnish Bajaj, the Bazi.com CEO, being arrested for allowing this website, allowing the sale of pornographic CDs on it. and even though he himself had no idea about it, even though eBay rules don't allow, Bazi.com rules didn't allow for that, but he was still arrested and held to be liable. So, and more, and I'll skip through all of these since there isn't too much time. 2005 is when .in domains can be registered. The community starts building up, especially because of Web 2.0, with Orkut making its presence felt in 2005. How many of you still have an Orkut account? Actually, more than I expected. Well, I still have an Orkut account somewhere. So, and Indic language cell phones also start appearing around 2005. The National E-Governance Plan, with its 33 different multi-modal projects, mission mode projects, I beg your pardon, is launched. And then the Internet Governance Forum in 2008 happens in Hyderabad in India. And this signals India's increasing engagement with internet governance worldwide. And 2009, we put forth a draft policy on Indian language IDNs. And unfortunately, this takes a while to get accepted at the level of ICANN. And 2010, we have a number of changes happening in the telecom sector, with 3G spectrum being auctioned, WiMAX licenses being auctioned, and the national IPv6 roadmap being laid down, and try releasing the national broadband plan as well. And 2011, ICANN approves 7 languages, Indian languages, for IDNs. And some of these are already operational. So you actually can register stuff, the web addresses in multiple Indian languages now. And the deadline of December 2011 for IPv6 adoption comes and goes, and not much change is seen, including, importantly, in in the ISPs owned by the Indian government. So this is just a kind of wrap up of where things are right now, with now IPv4 addresses are exhausted. Now GTLDs, the generic top-level domain names like .com, .org, etc. is opened up, and Reliance has applied for .Indian. Unfortunately, not many people in India have paid attention to this, and so Reliance will have final say on who gets to have a .Indian web address and who doesn't, if its application is accepted. And I have to check whether the Indian government has actually opposed its application in ICANN. E-commerce revenues from India are quite high now, estimated at 14 billion, and it's growing at a fast pace, importantly. And sorry, I've missed out on a little bit right at the end, but yes, and the population of the internet users in India is now estimated at around 120 million, which is around 10% of our population. We have Facebook estimates around 45 million of those are on Facebook, which is a very high number of those with any kind of internet connectivity, including through cyber cafes, etc. And compared to the number of broadband connections, which is around 13 million right now, it's a very high number. So lots of people who don't have always-on connections, who don't have fast internet connectivity, etc., are using things like Facebook. And very importantly, according to Facebook's claims, more people log into Facebook every day than at any given point of time are watching an IPL match. Okay. So the importance of the internet in India, even vis-a-vis traditional things such as television, which has much higher level of penetration is actually growing quite interestingly. And with that, I'll end, and we shall break for lunch now, and get back together at 2:30. Sorry, 2. Sorry, I beg your pardon, at 2.